Hello and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be learning how to make cinemagraphs. So you've probably seen a cinemagraph before and not necessarily known that that's what it was called. I'm sure everyone has seen an animated GIF before, and cinemagraphs are just that. They're animated GIFs. However, they have a very distinct style to them, and what makes it a cinemagraph, they have a very distinct look of being a photograph, with most of the image being still and then just one sort of repeating isolated bit of movement in what appears to be just a photograph. So we have that combination of being a movie and a photograph simultaneously. Now this is Jamie Beck and Kevin Berg's website, Cinemagraphs.com. I believe they are probably the ones who first sort of played with this idea and coined the term cinemagraph. You can see a lot of their stuff, especially the fashion work, has a model and then part of the hair is isolated. This is a really good example of how this works, because you get this feeling of looking at a still image that has motion in it. It's not just a looping piece of video footage. And you can do things like this, like the sparkle on the shoes, something that's a lot more subtle, or just, in this case, waving dress. Now, what would distinguish this from just being a looping piece of video? Well, the foot is in the air, so that makes this, stand out a lot more as being a mostly frozen image. When you have people that are maybe in mid-stride or things like that, you get the sense of there still being some motion here, although we've frozen all of those things where things normally wouldn't be still. So that's really helps sell the idea of a cinemagraph. Then there are things you need to think about when you're shooting your cinemagraph. Most notably would be stabilization. Using a tripod is pretty much a must if you want to do this sort of thing. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of situations where you could try to do it handheld and you could probably have something successful, but I would say if you're trying to do this, especially for the very first time, you're going to want to use footage that is shot on a tripod. You're going to shoot video using whatever means you have necessary. In the case of photography class, you're going to have DSLRs available to you that can shoot video, so you can get images similar to something like you see here. After you've picked what it is you think you want to do and you've shot some video, keeping in mind to keep it totally stable, and having a plan is going to save you lots of time in the end. Sort of know what you want to do before you start shooting it, and you'll be a lot more successful. We'll talk about a few other tips as we go along the way and actually deal with some footage. So let's get to it. So here we are in Adobe Bridge, and I'm just looking through a few clips that I shot just using my DSLR just to use as examples for cinemagraphs. Now some of these are going to work better than others. We can take a look at a couple of these. So we've just got model's hand and some grass moving and a dress moving. And we have this one of my cats, and that's got some good places we might be able to isolate some movement and do some looping stuff with. We've got, this has a lot of complex movement in it in a lot of different places, which can create some difficulties, but a lot of times it's to think simpler with these cinemagraphs and go for subtle movements. For the sake of just getting introduced to cinemagraphs and how we do this basic process, I think that this shot right here is probably going to be our best option. And so let's go through the process of turning this piece of video, let's watch that again, into what would look like a photograph with some subtle movement that we will call a cinemagraph. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in Photoshop CC. You may still be using Photoshop CS6, and that is totally okay. This process goes exactly the same way, or almost exactly the same way, but I will make sure to make note whenever it's something that is specific to CS6. I've opened this clip into Photoshop, and you'll see that we now have a new window, and this is our timeline window. timeline window shows us our clip or our layer. You'll notice we have a layer here in the layer stack, and this is also representative of this clip here. You'll notice when I click on that, the clip highlights. And as I scrub through, holding under this little blue marker with the playhead, we can see all the movement that's in that piece of video. I can also hit play here, and we can watch this attempt to play back at full speed in Photoshop. It probably won't be. I'm running screen capture software and audio capture software, and I'm trying to play back 1080p video in Photoshop, so we've got some slow frame rates there. But you can still see it playing back. It's actually just faster to scrub through and take a look. So now that we have our clip in, we need to shorten this clip down to only be a couple seconds of movement. You'll see right now, if we actually look at the time here, we go from 0 to 15. That's 15 seconds. So this is a really long clip. So scrubbing through here, we're going to look for, well, first of all, we should probably decide what it is we want to have move. So looking at this, the dress has a lot of movement here, and it's kind of interesting, but probably a lot more. That's probably going to be a lot more difficult, considering the model is kind of moving forward and backward, and left and right a little bit. That could be a little tricky. So the thing that I've noticed is that there's movement in this grass here, and that would be a really subtle movement to have going on in this shot. To have this the image frozen here, and just our grass fluttering in the background on a loop, and that's something that we can loop really easily, and we don't need very much of, so we can make the GIF nice and short, but we'll still have an interesting effect. Looking at this, scrubbing through this, the one thing I want to try to find is probably a place where this hand moves the most. I know we do want to make it frozen, and we will do that, but it'll also help to get as much of this grass in the shot if our hand isn't moving around. So I know that at the beginning of this clip, after the very beginning where there's a little camera movement there, the hand kind of settles in and stays in this one spot. So I'm going to grab the front end of the clip here. You can see how the cursor changes, and I'm going to drag this to my playhead and then make sure this is all the way back at 0. If you're in CS6, that'll probably snap all the way back. Also, if you're in CS6, you probably see this a little bit different in the layer stack. You probably have your clip in a folder. Now, I'm going to go ahead and actually do this. It probably is called Video Group 1, and your clip is inside a folder. And so it looks a lot like this if you're in CS6. I'll have to open this up so we see the clip there. So you're not confused if you're in CS6, it's going to look like this. Mind you, it's going to make no difference. If you are in CC, however, you can sort of skip over anytime I just ignore whenever I say if you're in CS6. So it's going to look like it's in Video Group 1, and that's totally fine. And this is important. I'm going to do this so I can show you one thing that's going to happen a little bit later. Now that we've trimmed that front end, let's find the back end of this. You can see how the hand starts to move a lot right there, so we probably want to be out before that, which is good because that puts us at about 2 seconds anyways. So I'm going to grab the right side of this clip, and I'm going to drag it all the way down. So now we just have our clip for 2 seconds. And not a whole lot of movement on this hand, which is going to be good. Now that I've got the clip trimmed down, I'm going to zoom in on it a little bit so we can fill the screen up a little more. Right down here we got the slider, and that's just to zoom in and out on our timeline. Now the next step here is going to be we need to freeze this image and isolate it, isolate a frame of it that is going to be our main image, because remember we're trying to make what looks like a photograph with subtle movement. So I'm going to create the still that is our photograph right here. So I want to find that ideal frame, and I'm thinking right here where I'm at, there's not a whole lot of motion blur, so there's a nice crisp image here. And I'm going to call this my reference frame or my still frame. So now that we have that, we need to create another layer that is going to be just this still frame. Now, there's a keyboard shortcut to creating a still image based off of where we're at. So with the playhead there, I'm going to select my layer and hold down Shift, Option, Command, and then hit E. When you do that, it creates a duplicate layer of the still frame you're at. So now you'll notice I have this new layer 1. And in CC, it's nice enough to go ahead and just group this into real layers, and it puts it on top, which is where we want it. Now they've changed the way it works between CS6 and Photoshop CC 2014. Now these actually do work as layers the way they should, and they're in a group. In CS6, however, when they're in a group together, they come one after the other. So we're going to need to move this layer, if you're in CS6, out of this group. So to do that, we're just going to click and drag until we see that sort of highlighted top bar and then let go. And now you can actually see that it's on a separate layer all by itself. So now that we've actually got those sorted out, since we're in CC, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up because it'll work just fine here and it'll look much more like what we're seeing in CS6. So those of you in CS6, ignore how this has changed. Everything is still essentially going to be working the same. We want to work on layer 1 right now. Layer 1 is selected. Now you'll notice I've got it all trimmed up and on top of our original video layer. So since it's sitting on top, obviously we're not seeing anything happen. As I scrub through this, there's no movement, no motion here in the grass at all, because all we're doing is looking at this top layer. Now if I turn the visibility off and I scrub through, we're going to see the video layer underneath it now, and we can see where all that motion is. And to do this and make a cinemagraph, it's as simple as adding a layer mask to this frozen layer and painting over with black and getting rid of and unmasking that part of it, so we see the moving video underneath it of just the grass but not the hand. So to do that, we're just going to have layer 1 selected, which is our frozen layer, and I'm going to click the add layer mask button, and there we have it. Now I can move through this and we're not going to see a change because, well, we haven't done anything to the mask. It's showing the entire still image. So we need to paint out part of this to show the moving grass underneath. So I'm going to grab a brush. I can probably use a slightly larger brush. I do want to make sure I have some feathering on this brush, so I'll make sure the hardness is turned down, because I'd like it to blend in seamlessly with the still footage. So having some feather on that would be nice. A hard edge might be noticeable. I'm going to paint with black, so black is already selected, and I'm going to start painting here. Now I'm not seeing any difference, obviously, because it pretty much looks the same underneath. Now there might be some places where the grass is starting to look a little different, but overall it looks pretty much the same. Now how can I tell what I've painted and what I haven't? Well, let's turn the bottom layer off, the video layer, and now we can see where we've painted this transparency. This might be a little too close to the hand, so I'm going to switch back to white and paint this back a little bit. I'm not so concerned about the grass that's right here. We're going to have enough of it moving that the illusion will work. So when that's done, I'll go ahead and looks like I've painted all of that out well. And I'm going to turn our bottom layer on underneath. And as I scrub through this, we're going to notice we see that moving grass happening, but we have a totally still image on this side. Now, maybe we want to do some color correction. We can do things like that. We could add curves adjustment on top, maybe darken up some of this, change how bright that hand gets. It's pretty bright. That's not where I want it though. Kind of tweak some of this video a little bit. Maybe we want to add a little more green into that. Nah, let's just get too green on our hands. But regardless, we can make some changes here. You can tweak to your heart's content. This is all just Photoshop adjustment layers, so anything you would do normally to a photograph or something in here, you can do the same thing with the video. So now that I have that, I'm feeling pretty good. I've got a couple seconds of the moving grass, which should loop pretty well, but let's go ahead and move into how we save this, and we can also preview what our animated GIF will look like in real time. So to do that, we're going to go to File, Save for Web, and it's going to open up this Save for Web dialog here. Now, depending on the size of your video or how complicated your color correction is, it might take a little while, but here we go. So now we are actually ready to save this as a GIF. Now I've got some settings that are already kind of set here. I'm using a GIF with 256 colors, which is probably what you want to do. The easiest way to sort of get there would be to go to the presets, pick the GIF 128 ditherd, and then change your colors from 128 to 256, and that'll give you more color representation. Now, we also could change the dithering here, and that's going to change how these colors, you'll notice how sharp and how smooth those colors are blending together. The thing about a GIF is that it only can do so many colors. So things with lots of different hues and lots of different shades, these are going to start to blend together or sort of bunch together into groups because there isn't that color representation that there is in the original high-def video. Now we can change the dither algorithms to be different. Sometimes noise looks better. It's going to take just a second for this to kind of lock in, but you can play around with these settings and look at the preview here to see how things look. Now, the other thing I want to do is change the image size of this GIF. Most GIFs you don't look at in 720p, so I'm going to shrink this down to something a little more reasonable. And as we do that, we'll watch this number here change. And that also happened when I changed the dithering. Now, I'm going to say that noise on this image works a lot better. I like sort of what we're seeing in the grass. It still doesn't look like it's sort of blobbed out quite as much anymore, so that's really good. It reduced the image size, which is nice, because the smaller the GIF, the better. If you're going to send it through, like any image sharing or social media, or you're going to try to use it on Tumblr or anything like that, there are size restrictions, and you really want them to just pop up. You don't want something to have to load for 30 seconds before somebody can see just some waving grass behind a hand. So let's go ahead and shrink this down. So we're going to actually cut it about in half. So I'm actually going to go to 600 pixels wide, and I'm just going to click on to another window, and again it's going to start loading, and we'll see our image size change. Alright, there we go. And now we can see how it's shrunk down. Now on this monitor, even at 100%, it's pretty small, but I'll bump that back up. What we really want to do is look at this in our browser. Most GIFs have to be played through something like Chrome or Safari or Firefox, one of your browsers, for them to be visible. Usually just double clicking on a GIF, especially if you're in a Mac OS, it's just going to open it up in preview, and you're really not going to be looking at an animated anything. So let's go ahead and preview this in a browser so we can see exactly what it's going to look like with all of its motion. Oh, before I forget, I also need to check this animation setting right here. The looping options, we want this set to forever so that it continually loops back over on itself, and so our image always has movement. So make sure that's set to forever, and then I'm going to hit preview. Preview is going to open up our default browser and display our GIF as we would be saving it. And there we go. We have our GIF saved to size, running at full speed, and here we have it. We have just this photograph with this really subtle movement of the grass kind of looping, and it's with that movement of that grass, it's really hard to tell where the loop point is. It just feels like it's just infinitely in motion, and that's what you want, something nice and subtle like that. So with that done, we just need to save it. So we'll go back to Photoshop, and from here we just click on save. We decide where we're going to save this. Let's just say the desktop, and you're all done. So check back for part 2, where we talk about video frames as layers and how we can use that to have some more fun with motion in our cinemagraphs.